Hello, it's Maggie, the Cheshire Crafter here. I've been charity shopping and I bought 5 items of clothing here that are linens and cotton. And these are from men's shirts, 2 ladies' dresses and a skirt. In this video, I'm going to show you how I deconstructed them so that you can use your fabrics in your sewing projects. I'm going to save these particularly for quilting. Now, I'm wanting beige linen. If we go in and take a look, it's for the catalogue company Very. And although there's a dart in the top here and it's pulled in with a tie belt, if I take that belt apart, we can see that the dress itself is pretty straight up and down. Flares out a little bit at the bottom, but I'll be able to get long strips of fabric from that. The placket fold over where the buttons are. Once I take the buttons off, that's an extra inch at least. And on the back, there are no darts, so it's just one large piece of fabric. The other thing is this belt is sewn in the middle, but it's 2 long pieces of fabric. Once I take this apart, it's going to actually be 3 inches wide, and it actually widens out at one end. So it's worth me taking that apart. And it was £7.99 at Clare House Children's Hospice in Stockton Heath. Now, this dress is quite interesting in design. The design is such that the round neck comes under the bust to an empire line. And at the side here, there's a dart that comes right down and opens out into a pocket. And there's one either side. Now, I think as a dress, that'd be really comfortable to wear. The sleeves are loose and there's no turn-up on them. And then, interestingly, the back on this, the back is completely shapeless and all one piece. Perfect. I've never heard of wool overs, but this cost me £7.15. What's interesting about this is that it's in 14 pieces. So it is a 14 gore skirt with a narrower piece of fabric at the top. And then as we go down the fabric, it widens out to give some flare. So this lower flare at the bottom of each panel is 8 inches, but it goes down to 6 inches quite quickly. And at the top, it's 3 inches. There's a zip at the side. It was by Atmosphere and I paid £3.25 for it. Let me show you the stitches on the inside. Now, because those stitches are quite large, they're not going to be too difficult to remove. Sometimes in linen, the stitches really sink into the linen fabric and are very small. So it would be just worth cutting at the seams. But if I do that, I'm going to end up with that extra 1/4 of an inch. So for each panel, at the top here, I'm going to acquire another 1/2 inch, and that's going to make a difference in really making good use of all these small pieces. On the men's shirt rail, I found this shirt, and I bought it because the fabric is a beautiful floral, ditzy floral in blues on a white, just off-white, I would say. It's by St George by Duffer, don't know them, and it's slim fit. Now, that means that it's either got darts in it or it's cut to make it slimmer. And for that, I need to look on the back. You can see that it's got the contrasting fabric on the collar and at the cuff. And just on the inside of the cuff there is because this fabric is really soft, but it's almost got a sheen to it. It's really good quality cotton. And it reminds me of a Liberty print. There's no pocket to remove at the front. The buttons are pretty boring really. Now let's take a look at the back. Obviously there's a collar and a yoke at the top. There's no fold over or placket here, but actually to create that slim fit they've actually cut it in slightly at the sides, so there isn't a dart for me to unpick here. That would normally make it a slimmer fit. A slimmer fit also means that the sleeve width is usually slightly narrower, but actually that's a good. And lastly, the fabric on this man's shirt is fantastic. It reminds me of millefleury or fireworks or just lots of little flowers and ditzy. It's actually a size XXL. They've actually put darts in the back of this, which I think is quite strange. If we look at the sleeve width, I really can't get my hand fully outstretched across that. I've just measured it, and the width across here is 8 inches, which means I've got 16 inches of material in an XXL shirt. On the back, it's hard to see the dart because of the very busy pattern, but there are 2 darts that have been sewn in. Now they're going to be easy to unpick. I measured from armpit to armpit and it's 26 inches across, and then from the bottom of the yoke here is 30 inches in length. This I paid £6.25. For taking these garments apart, I've got 3 options. One is the rotary cutter by Clover, a pair of fabric scissors and a Clover seam ripper, and they all need to be really sharp. I use a seam ripper to remove the buttons. It's easier to cut the straps straight across. These would be a good soft strap for a carrier bag. On the both sides of the front, I've been able to unpick the dart so that that fabric will open out. And on the placket side, where the buttonholes are, let me show you how that's opened out. When I've opened out the placket, you can see where the stitch line was. I've acquired 3 inches of fabric, and on the hem I've got 1.5 inches. It's worth unpicking, but it's not worth me unpicking the side seams, so let me take the rotary cutter to that. I'm not using a ruler for this, it's easy enough to do it freehand. You can see where the buttonhole placket is. There's a stripe, so I'm trying to take it as well as I can straight up that stripe, and it cuts through very easily, just like butter, and comes apart. When you get to the bottom, the first buttonhole is a long way up. That's about 9 inches. So that piece of fabric, when it's unpicked, will measure about 9 by 3. That's worth keeping. So I've got the seam exposed with 2 pieces of fabric together. And I've gone right up the seam. I'll keep this because I'll use it as a ribbon. The collar has been turned over, and the piece with interfacing I'm going to cut on the linen here and across the 2 front pieces. On this skirt, I've unpicked a few stitches either side of the zip on the waistband using the seam ripper, and that's in order to release the zip. I'm now going to cut that out now with the rotary cutter. I'm using a single layer of fabric, and I've folded the zip over so I can get as close as I can to the seam line to unpick and retain as much of this first panel of fabric either side that I can. That recovers the zip. Now I can't reuse these metal fasteners, so I'm just going to cut off directly both ends. Like that, these will get discarded. And now I'll remove the waistband just underneath it. And then I'm going to start to unpick each seam here, and that'll yield that 14 panel pieces. And I'm going to do that while I'm sitting watching TV. I can now see the waistband, and it's actually in 2 pieces sewn together. Sometimes it's 1 piece folded over with a top stitch, and you can't tell until you take it apart what it's like. I'm going to unpick those stitches. And you can also see on this that the interfacing is not fused together to it. So I'll get 2 pieces of fabric long pieces of fabric, about 2 inches in width from the waistband. I'm going to try to unpick the seams on this because the stitches are clearly visible and they haven't sunk into the linen. There's also the overlocking edge to undo. The hem, likewise, if I find it too difficult to unpick, I'll just take it off in a long piece. On this dress, I'm going to show you why I'm not going to bother unpicking it. Apart from the fact the stitches are small, it's actually very well worn in places, particularly underneath the arms. You wouldn't want to recover that fabric, so I'm going to cut the seams on this one. And I'm going to start just below the stitch line around the collar. You can see that there's a fold over of fabric here, and on the front you can you see the stitch line there? I'm going to cut about here. I've now turned it inside out and I'm going to have to cut with a double layer, so I need to feel that the seams are on top of each other, and I'm going to cut both sides here and here of that sleeve. Then when the sleeve's opened out, I'm going to do the same on the inside of this seam. These seams will then be discarded. As the hem on the sleeve was very well worn, I've cut that off too. Now that it's turned inside out, I'm going to take off that outside seam, but you can see the construction of the way that the pocket folds a little bit easier, and that's going to make it easier to deconstruct once I've taken this out. When you cut out a shoulder seam, it means that you have 2 separate pieces of fabric and they will now fold flat. The back piece is now complete, and now I've got to tackle those awkward pockets. But actually, when you open it out, it just looks like a pocket. So again, cut out that seam and go up this seam and cut the lot. So there's the side piece and pocket deconstructed, and of course I've got 2 of this. Now to tackle that front seam. And that's the piece that separates the bodice from the skirt, a straight cut either side, and you can see what a difference those folds make to the width of the fabric. Now I have to unpick this seam here around the collar. Now that took me about 15 minutes, but I needed frequent sit downs. I prepare all my shirts in the same way. After taking off the buttons, I first take off the collar and the attachment under this edge. Then where the sleeve attaches, I'll cut the inside and the outside edge of that seam, and this is going through double thickness up to the shoulder. Now I'll cut off the cuff here on the sleeve. This now exposes this edge, which I can cut up the seam right up to the underarm. Then I cut out the placket at the cuff, and you can see as I open the fabric out wide, this measures 16 inches or about 15 inches across. On the cuff I've taken off the buttonhole end and I've neatened up the other end to match. I'm now going to unpick these seams using the seam ripper. On the main body of the shirt, I'm going to release the yoke. The yoke on this has been doubled on the inside. I'm going to make my cut just beneath this seam line and through the back. And now here and here, I'll unpick this by hand. Now I can lay the shirt out flat and cut out the side seams right the way up either sides of both side seams. Remember, I'm going to have to unpick the darts to make the back lie flat. On the 2 fronts, I'll unpick the placket that held the buttons, but I'm going to cut this side of the buttonhole placket, and then I'll be able to rescue the fabric that's in between the buttonholes. And this is the fabric between the buttonholes. The buttonholes I'll actually throw away, but you'd be surprised how much fabric there is there when you open it out. All of those seams will get unpicked when I've got time, and I will use them as ties or in a project that requires rags. And I'll now repeat that process with this one. Thanks for watching, but for now this is Maggie the Cheshire Crafter. Bye.